Hi, I wanted to do a lengthy review or a thorough review of Backrooms by Kane Parsons, Kane Pixel's channel, some of his other projects. I love the ideas of liminal spaces, backrooms, pool rooms, weird core, dream core, all of those things. And also coming from an artist's perspective as a fine art photographer and a content creator, I thought this would be fun to really delve into my thoughts on it, some backgrounds on the project, and some of my thoughts. James Wan is also attached to this project, along with Osgood Perkins, and Kane also co-scored the music with another producer, which is super cool, having no background in music theory, just playing in FL Studios and things like that. A little bit about Kane that I've learned. As we all know, he's 20 years old. That is amazing to get this opportunity, but I think it's well worth it learning about his background and how, since he was a child, he realized director was something he wanted attached to his name. And as he played things like Minecraft and just learning things like Blender, starting in middle school and being into art, it's really not a surprise that he is where he is now, especially just finding free projects and free programs to really put his heart and soul into building these different worlds. I know he was inspired by a lot of things to get started, even different anime like Attack on Titan and Paranoia Agent, which you may see a little bit more in the oldest view, which was my scariest movie, my number one movie 2 years ago, I believe. So if you have not seen the oldest view, I highly recommend it. Also, Backrooms was my most anticipated movie for this year, so that makes me even more excited to talk about it, and I have seen it twice. Just in case you're not aware yet, what is a backroom? What is a liminal space? Liminal space is a transitional space. It can be physical or non-physical, so it's an in-between place. The back rooms looks like what it looks like. It's back of something, and it looks uncanny usually because it is a place that seems like it should have people, but it is essentially devoid of life, but it also can feel nostalgic and calm. So the idea of liminal space at least does not have to evoke fear, but often it does, along with everything else and just the kind of banality of it. This started off as a 4chan post that is like a kind of creepy pasta situation that went viral, and he started a series on YouTube that took off, and now here we are. Some more of its inspirations he mentioned being Portal, the video game, Mr. Robot, 1 Hour Photo with Robin Williams, which I plan to watch, Punishment Park. Outside of seeing it kind of like a video game, it does speak to the idea he's talked about of monoculture. Many people feel like monoculture is dying, and also industrialism and what that feels like and how it can feel bleak or somehow wrong. And that makes sense, being as we become more technologically advanced and industry and technology is still accelerating a little bit faster than maybe we are as humans. But with that said, I really feel like he understood his fan base. This movie could have gone a few different ways, and there are other people's ideas of the backrooms on YouTube, but I like that he did stick to his inspiration, but not also giving us just a copy of what he has already done, but actually making a true movie. He wanted to make something that I believe was more character driven and how the space itself actually reflects the main characters. I thought it was funny. I read a comment that said this movie is a museum of a movie set, which is pretty funny considering I believe it is 30,000 square feet and some of the workers actually got lost in the space itself. I love that Kane made all of these sets in Blender, brought those images, and they were able to actually make the sets from the things that he did build on his own digitally. But yeah, it's giving us the urbanization of the world in a sort of contextuality that we can almost feel. So seeing this movie does feel like an experience in the way that I think I wanted Skinamarink to give me. I should also say movies that have liminal elements in it I love whether they're beautiful or scary. Skinamarink was an experience, but it didn't feel like it had a strong story. A lot of people felt like they understood the short film better. This definitely felt like an experience, and I like that they allowed us to live in the world of the space in the way that they did. That felt like real time, along with it having an analog feel to it, which I think worked since it is set in 1990. So the space is set in the psychology of the character, which makes sense to why it's a little bit absurd and impossible, as it is a little absurd to be a human, as we have Mary, who doesn't really practice what she preaches, and we have Clark, who's trying to practice but not really doing a great job. I also want to mention that Kane said he has 70 pages of lore and background for things on this, so hopefully there is a sequel. And I saw a post just the other day that he is looking for collaborators as a writer, because while he has the visual language and he knows what he wants the story to say, it's still hard with words, which I can understand. In many things, it is the screenwriting and the dialogue itself that is harder to make well, even though we speak all of the time. But with many of us not having the best skills at speaking our thoughts, talking to others, getting your thoughts across, or being interpreted correctly, you feel that sometimes in writing. But I also think that makes sense for the idea of the backrooms with copies being misinterpreted and getting worse and evolving over time, but not necessarily evolving to be better. Maybe like people or some of the things in the world. While this is definitely not, I think, for a general audience, unless you like atmospheric, artsy horror, elevated horror, other than jump scares, slashers, things like that. But the movie doesn't over-explain itself, and I think since this is a sci-fi, psychological horror movie, we're going to get more of that sci-fi element, I think, in the next movie. But if you did see this going into it knowing nothing, I can understand how you might feel a little lost. Not that you need to know anything, but just knowing there's not as many questions that will be answered right. This is definitely not for a general audience. It is a movie that makes you think, in my opinion. There are so many practical effects in this movie. It reminds me of Cubism, different types of photography. The main entity is a person, an actual 7'7" man who played an alien Romulus. That is so cool. I can understand a little bit of the disappointment of not getting some of the entities from the films or the other offshoots of Backrooms, but at the same time, if you've seen the oldest view, it checks out. I feel like you'll get it. You're like, okay, I see where this is going. He did his own thing by, I think, trying to give the internet folks what we want, but also still keeping it his original vision. It translates into an A24 movie because that is what it is. And they are not going to do regular decade. This movie is a slow burn. I would say don't watch it when you're tired. I initially saw it at 9:30 at night. I definitely had to sit up in my seat a few times because it truly takes its time. While the score is good, it also keeps it creepy by not over-relying on the music. And there are times where you just hear the electricity and feel like you're in the space with the characters. If you have not seen it in theaters, I do recommend seeing it alone or a matinee in the middle of the week. Me and my friend and I actually saw it twice because our first viewing experience was not favorable. There were many children and teenagers and even talkative adults, lights. A lot was going on. This is not a children's movie. It's not that it's crazy, terrifying, or gory, but I do think it would be frightening to young children. And I also think the psychological aspect of it, I don't know if it's going to be interesting because this is a very atmospheric movie and it's not a popcorn jump scare, see it in a large audience, enjoyable type of movie for me. So we did re-see it at 9 a.m. on a Tuesday. and it was perfect. I actually liked the movie more the second time around. I got a lot more out of it. There were scenes I didn't see. There are things I picked up on better. I didn't know if I would like it or if I would be less unsettled, or some of the things that were creepy, would they be creepy again to me? They were. So what is this movie about? I think this movie is about being stuck. It's like being stuck in a fishbowl, not knowing how to move forward, being okay with complacency. The movie has Mary, who is a psychologist, therapist, something like that, and we hear her tapes play, and it talks about how the neural pathways to least resistance is what the brain will prefer to take to stay safe from whatever it had to do to kind of stay stuck and not really move forward. So with that, even if you want to change, it doesn't mean it's necessarily easy to change. Or if you have the tools, that you will use them correctly, have the motivation for the tools. So many things can go awry, and we see this both in Mary's life from her trauma and Clark and his issues that he has, that he seems like he's trying to work through, not succeeding. Mary is a successful therapist and she still is not really succeeding. And we see these things come to haunt them in the back rooms in a way. Change is hard and change is scary. I think we can say that's an echo in the movie as well. And sometimes things change, but it's not necessarily better. So change does happen for the characters. They meet situations that cause them to change. Is it a better change? I don't know. It's literally a liminal space. They are stuck in transition, sort of repeating probably nearly the same day every day, like many of us. There is a specific line in the movie that I've been thinking about. It's when, this is slightly spoilery, Clark is talking to his Captain Clark double, and he's saying, she said, "We don't have to change." I read that in a few different ways. I'm not 100% sure which way he wants it, because he enjoys being stuck. He tried to change, and I think that's a really honest take. You try to change and you realize, I prefer to be where I am. And so the back rooms actually felt quite like home, which also makes sense as he's an architect. But it felt like home to him. And he tells his double, "Did you hear that? She says we don't have to change." So I took that as a couple of different ways, meaning we don't have to change who we are. We don't have to become another person. We don't have to do all this hard therapy work that's not working for us that well anyway. Or it could mean he's telling his double, we don't have to change into sort of the scary version of ourselves, which is also true in real life. We could take path of least resistance and not change and stay where we are and possibly become monsters based on our life and trauma. Or we could choose not to become that based on what we've been through. But literally, it eats him alive to be stuck either way. Either decision still eats him alive in this version. Are we sure that the Clark we're seeing is the Clark that we know? Is it the Clark that is a copy of a Clark? I don't think that's super important. The idea that that may be his wife definitely makes me think Clark was a little scary to his wife, being that his wife's copy was extremely afraid of the captain version, and the captain version of him actually had blood in him and rage, and I think it was just kind of showing who he could become. The version we see of Mary, who she could become catatonic like her mother, just kind of like, you know, a bump on the log. And that is where they both were naturally heading based on their lack of movement in life, even though seemingly they were moving. So that's where I think the fishbowl analogy really does ring. The idea of the back rooms is kind of like a mental prison. Things don't have to get better. Things can change, but they don't have to get better. It's a sort of self-sabotage that I think many of us accidentally run into, and it's kind of shown in both versions of the main characters, Mary and Clark. And Mary not being the best therapist. She seems extremely checked out and she's just going through the motions. And it is easy to go through the motions, even when we're supposed to be helping people close to us, whether family, friends, clients, just doing enough to get by to where it seems like movement, but you're really just walking in circles. There's a lot of visual language in this movie, more than just the dialogue or the dinner scene, if we can. And I think the visual language coupled with some of the themes, I think it works. I know that Kane wants us to kind of figure it out and guess for ourselves, but he has hinted at some of these themes. But it also is nice to know that actual lore does have somewhere it's going. It does mean something. It's not vague. It doesn't mean it's all for nothing. But as far as the themes of the movie and the artistic expression, I think it was very well played out. I was talking to my sister and I was thinking about our conversation along with Backrooms, Obsession, and even Euphoria, seeing them back to back. I did see some things that I think rings true for many of these overlapping ideas. And what it kind of made me think about in the end, I told her I recently watched a movie and it was repeating a quote that said the pathway of least resistance is what the brain clings to for safety. How much harder it is to create a neural pathway to actually make change that will put you essentially in a different position and situation. I thought about echoing what my sister said about people being basically inherently lazy, but in that I would add compassion and grace, and I understand why doing the work is hard. And even if you are in complacency of an emotion or a situation, it's still hard to make a change for the better because your nervous system is dysregulated and stuck in a place that it knows that thinks it will keep it safe, even though it really isn't. Like, you're just kind of floating on the water. You're not really moving. And building those new neural pathways is pretty challenging. The loose desire alone to want things to be different or better isn't enough to catapult the change. Essentially having a toolbox without the tools, essentially. But at the same time, you don't really want to go to Ace Hardware, or either you do want to go to Ace Hardware, but you just browse and maybe you'll buy the tools another time. Maybe you buy the tools. Maybe you don't have enough money for the tools. Maybe you buy the wrong tools, and that still does not ensure that you will use the tools correctly or use the tools without injury. And I think we absolutely see that in the Backrooms movie. Thanks for watching.